Thanks everyone for joining today. I'm Tom Menifee. I'm with AVST. And from a GDPR perspective, I am a data controller. I'm a data processor. And I have my very own personal data as well that I care about. So that's the topic of the hour is GDPR, which stands for General Data Protection Regulation. Came out of the EU. How many people are US based here? Many. And it's good that you're here because it applies to all of us. Even though this is came out of the European Union, it potentially impacts every company worldwide. What we're going to talk about, GDPR is a regulation, as mentioned, came out of the EU, very complex. Very long regulation. I'm not going to go through every article associated with it. We're going to try to break it down, simplify it, because in a lot of ways this is kind of common sense how to go about it. So that's going to be the discussion today. First, this is the only commercial part of our presentation. AVST is an ex-Medius company, and we really specialize in enterprise software, communication software that we can deliver to our customers securely and to really work with existing and future IT infrastructures. So are we a security company per se? From an application standpoint, we are. But it's really we've got unique experiences here because we are a processor of data, which I'll explain, controller of data, and then just like every individual, we all have our personal data. Not that it really matters from GDPR and security is not it's not size oriented. It doesn't matter. We have experience with the largest companies around the world. They use our technology. We sell to smaller companies as well. But as I mentioned, it really doesn't matter. This isn't a regulation that only applies to large companies. It applies to everybody because every company around the world manages or has access to, saves personal information. And that's what it's all about. So firstly, why does these kinds of regulations come about? It's really because of the data breaches that are out there. And it's not that, employees are doing malicious things, or businesses are doing malicious things. It's, breach happens. I just coined that term, by the way. Breach happens. Things just occur. How many of us have, sent an email out and Outlook did an auto-addressing thing? You typed in Tom and it went to Tom Miller and it was supposed to go to Tom Menifee. It happens all the time. The user, the employee didn't mean to do that, but it happens, and it happens more frequently than we'd like. So again, it's not because employees are doing bad things on purpose, but things happen. And because of that, breaches occur. You're opening up emails with attachments that you thought it was from somebody that you knew, and yet it was a phishing attack. Somebody got breached outside of your company. You got an email that has an attachment you shouldn't open, and you did it, and now all of a sudden your company's breached. So it's just a reality of the IT world that we're all living in now, where things do happen, and certainly some very high-profile cases. Is there anyone in this room that was not personally impacted by the Equifax? Yep, not a single one. I mean, we all are subject to it. Did any of us do anything wrong? Absolutely not. But breaches do happen, and because of that, regulations come about to try to protect us and try to solve problems by standardizing the approaches that companies must take. And those are, so the list that was up there, the Equifax, et cetera, those are all the high profile type breaches, but thousands and thousands of breaches happen all the time. It seems like every other day I get another email from our IT department saying, hey, there's a new phishing attack that we're seeing. It looks like it's coming from such and such a company, and it's coming into our organization. Don't touch it. And it's different organizations all the time. It's not that we were breached specifically, but companies that we do business with got breached. So it happens all the time. And so it's just a reality that we're having to deal with. And because of these breaches, that's what's driving the regulations. So if you look at the various regulations that have come about, some of them are financial in nature, some of them are healthcare in nature, some of them legal, some within education. So, the FERPA, the HIPAA, the whatever it may be. Now it's GDPR, and GDPR is one that's relevant right now because the deadline for GDPR compliance is coming up shortly, and we'll talk about that. So GDPR is an interesting one because it's elevating the importance of individuals' personal data, and that's what it's trying to protect. So if you look at the various regulations that are out there, and it doesn't matter if they're U.S.-based or European-based or some other locale, they really share a number of things in common. And it's wide-reaching. So this isn't just a technology issue. It's not just how is IT going to solve these issues. Some of it's very much policy-oriented or procedural-oriented. So really taking a look at the entire organization. How do you protect that data? So with that as a very quick intro, let's talk more about GDPR. Are people not familiar with GDPR already? I assume you've got some familiarity, but anyone that goes, nope, have no idea, and that's why I'm here. Anyone? Interesting. Okay, very good. So GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. And what does it do? Came from the EU, but we'll talk about who it impacts here shortly. And it really elevates personal data protection up to that same level of importance as legal data, financial data, et cetera. So it's saying, hey, personal data belongs to the person, not to the people who have access to it, and therefore you have to protect it. So if you look at GDPR, it's got 99 articles, so it's a very lengthy regulation. And I'm pleased to say I am not going to walk you through all 99 articles. We're gonna try to simplify this and really talk about what does it mean to you as you're representing your companies that are here. What does it mean to you? What do you need to do to be in compliance with GDPR? What are the things you need to focus on? And you're probably doing a bunch of them today. There's probably some that you aren't doing, so we'll discuss those. So first, who does it apply to? From a company perspective, it's any enterprise that conducts business and retains personal information on a single citizen of the EU. Okay, so this isn't it only applies to companies in the European Union. It applies to the data of the citizens from the EU. So anyone, no matter where you're located, if you maintain or control or process personal data of an EU citizen, this applies to you as a company, and you need to adhere to it. So what is it? It's really, I think the easiest way to think about this is personal data belongs to the person. Okay? Everyone else that has access to it or touches it is just a custodian of that data. They're letting us use it for some period of time. Okay, and so the definition of personal data is extremely broad. This isn't just social security numbers and birth dates, that sort of thing. It's anything that you can associate with that person. So it may be their photograph. It could be their, things that they're posting on social media. It could be an IP address associated with them, email addresses, telephone numbers, etc. Anything that is unique to that individual, that's personal data, and it must be protected. Okay, as I mentioned, this isn't, although the regulation came out of the EU and it's specifically there to protect EU citizens, this is not an EU only thing. It's across the board. Anyone that maintains that data, as I mentioned, of an EU citizen, this applies to them. There is a fair amount of speculation that this regulation has legs, and you're going to see it become more and more broad, and other countries will start to adopt it or variants of it. But it applies to us today. So a couple of terms that you need to understand with GDPR, it's processor and data controller. So essentially any cloud provider you'd consider a processor. So anyone that's processing data, they may not be holding on to that data or doing anything with it for their own purposes, but if it's flowing through their resources, then they're a processor. AVST is a processor. We've got a number of cloud solutions where for our customers, we host some communication solutions, and we've got a security solution that people can use. As they're using our hosted service, we are a processor when it comes to those companies. The data controller is the company itself. So who actually has access to that data and can do things with it? We're certainly, within our own organization, the relationships we have with vendors and customers, we may have personal information associated with them. So, for example, if we have a sales partner that's in the UK, and we have names and email addresses of their employees or their salespeople, we're controlling that data. We have it within our CRM system. We have it within our ERP system, perhaps. We're a controller of that data. Every person in this room works for a company that's a controller of the data. Underneath that is really the technology that's doing it. So we're also a technology vendor. We're providing solutions to companies. That doesn't mean that we're their data controller, but we're in a position where we can help them safely and privately control that data. Okay? So when does this all come down? GDPR compliance is, the regulation calls for compliance by May 25th of this year. So not that far off. This has been in discussions for the last couple of years, and it's really coming to a headway. With that, we've got people that have never heard of GDPR and haven't done anything to take steps in this regard. This may be unfair at this point of the conversation because we aren't too far into it, but I'll ask anyways. Do you think your company is ready for GDPR compliance? How many people, show of hands, think you're ready? Yeah. So I'm going to say 5%, not much. The studies that are out there are saying, and these would have a bent towards European companies because they would have known about it or focused on it more before, but only 50% think they're going to be ready. the deadline. So this is something we all have to pay attention to, because it really does. It impacts all of us, regardless of what business we're in, regardless of our location. It's something that we're going to have to take a look at. So let's jump into GDPR. What are the things you need to know? And what I've done here is really pulled out from those 99 articles that I mentioned. What are some of the ones that really you need to focus on? So let's take a look at that. First is processing and storing personal data. So if you look at this, Article 5, organizations shall collect data lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner, and for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes, shall be processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security of the personal data using appropriate technical or organizational measures. So the first thing, this is really a two-part deal. It's firstly, what are we collecting and why are we collecting it? And is that transparent to the individuals that we're collecting it from? So you've got to be extremely open about this. It's not that you can, grab personal information from somebody and use it for your own purposes and they have no idea that you've done that. Absolutely illegal in the eyes of GDPR. And then once you have that data, it's all about storing it securely, and we'll get into more specifics on that. But if you have been given authority to have this data, you better be able to prove that you can handle it securely, or the person can request to get it back. Consent. So each individual that does business with you, that causes an occasion for you to collect personal information associated with them, they've got to be able to opt in, essentially. So somebody that goes to a website and wants to order something, they know that they're providing you with some personal information. They're entering a credit card number, and they know why they're doing that. But that doesn't mean you can hold on to that. Right? So typically online, you're gonna be able to opt in. Hey, do you want me to store this for future purposes so that you don't have to enter it every time you buy something from my site? Or do you not want it stored? Those are the kinds of transactions that are absolutely mandatory. You cannot just decide for yourself, I'll hold on to the credit card number because it'll make it easier for them in the future. I'm going to make that decision on behalf of the individual. No. They've got to be able to consent to it. So organizations shall be able to demonstrate that the data subject, the owner of the personal information, has consented to processing of his or her personal data for specific purposes. Consent shall be informed and can be withdrawn at any time. Okay? So an added wrinkle there. Even if they consent today, that doesn't mean that they can't come back in a day, in a week, in a month and say, you know what? I don't want you to hold on to that data anymore. I'm never going to buy from you again. Let's yank the credit card number off of your site. Okay, so as part of that, right to access. And this is for the individual. So the data subject shall have the right to obtain confirmation if data concerning him or her are being processed. Where that is the case, they have the right to know the purpose, categories, recipients, retention period, sources, and location of the data. May also request to have a copy of the data. Okay? This all goes back to that simple principle, which is who owns the personal data? The individual does. And they should have full access to it, and they should have control over that data and have rights to revoke, right? And as they have access, if they find discrepancies, if there's things that are wrong, they can demand that you correct it. So, right to rectification. Data subject shall have the right to obtain without undue delay the rectification of inaccurate personal data. Again, they own the data. Okay? It's in a lot of ways, it's pretty simple. Yeah.
When it says they have the right to know where the data is stored,
Yes.
is that the geography? Is that the company, whether it's internal or outsourced? Is that the database name?
Yeah, so it's where that discussion typically leads is it's really who is the controller and processor of that data is what they want to know. So, it's one thing to say, it's, we're controlling that. It's like, okay, but are you processing it? Or it's processed in AWS or processed, wherever. Yeah, but not down to the, here's the database I have it stored in, that sort of thing. Right to erasure. So as you can imagine, since the individual controls the data, they should be able to demand that you get rid of it. So that's a core piece of this. Anyone that's controlling personal data, you have to be in a position to say, yep, I've deleted it. I no longer have access to it whatsoever. We no longer have a personal data relationship at this point. Right to portability. So again, if, in certain situations, the individual is depending on a data controller or a processor to manage much of their data. Since they own it, they should be able to move that somewhere else. So a cloud provider cannot say, nope, sorry, we don't move that data anywhere else. We'll delete it for you, but we're not going to give it to you so you can go to our competitor or something like that. That's not allowed in this. It's, I've provided you access to my data. I own the data. I get to move it around if I want to. So right to portability. Data subject shall have the right to receive the personal data they provided to an organization, have the right to transmit that data to another organization without hindrance. And this is really, as I mentioned, this is protection of the, one guy saying, I don't want to help you go to my competitor type of thing. Yeah.
Does this only apply if you are the creator of that data, or if you're a data aggregator and taking data from multiple sources?
In terms of what your rights are to move, or yeah.
Let's say I'm processing invoices from a carrier that have CDRs, right? Do I have to provide that data to process to the competitor, or can I say it's available at the source of the data?
I believe you can say it's available at the source. So it's really, in that case, it's, there's a data processor and they're the one, there's a data controller and they're the ones that have the obligation to the customer. Yeah. Yep. Data protection by design. So this all now goes into the first part of it, really, where what are the rights of the user, right? And then the next piece of GDPR is really, okay, what assurances can you give that you're effectively protecting that data? So the first part's control, the other is really, protection. So you have to be able to prove that from a data processing perspective, an IT perspective, a security policy perspective, you've got procedures in place to effectively manage this data. So if you are going to be the custodian of that data, your shop better be clean. Security of data processing. So again, from a data processing perspective, organizations shall implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure a level of security. So it really is that, one's more of a procedural type thing. Do you have a security officer in place? Do you do things like, hey, no individual gets to access all the data? You've got separation of duties, those kinds of things. So one's very much procedural. The other gets down to, encryption and that sort of thing. Yes, sir.
Who defines what appropriate is? Term is very subjective.
Yeah, that's true. So GDPR has some detail around that. But I think, much of that's going to get flushed out as time goes by. But you're right, it is pretty subjective going, my view is one thing, your view may be another. Yeah.
There's certifications you get, though, like ISO.
Sure. Yeah. PCI DSS and ISO and whatnot. Yeah. So there are some of those governing bodies where you can go, okay, we've achieved this and therefore.
So that, I guess that's my question. If I go get ISO certified or follow rules with all standards and that proves best appropriate measures and satisfactory to these folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the certifications is actually documented. How you do these.
That's right.
So much of the law requires.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Could people in the back hear that discussion? Okay, good. Reporting of data breaches. So this is one we brought up the Equifax example. They failed miserably, I believe, at this regulation. So you have to report a data breach, not just to governing bodies, but you also have to report it to the individuals that are impacted, and you have very little time to do that. So this isn't something of you have a breach, people are exposed, you're hiding it while you're trying to come up with your marketing spin on why did this occur, and you don't get to prepare that. You have to expose the breach immediately or within 72 hours. So that's a key piece of this. Risk assessment. This is an ongoing issue where this isn't just, we conducted our risk assessment, we're good. This is a living thing. So organizations have to continually carry out the assessments and reassess. The gentleman had brought up some of the certifications, ISO. That's not something you do just once, but you have to renew your audits and whatnot. So you have to continue to prove that you're effectively protecting the data. Every organization needs to assign a data protection officer. And this is, public companies, this all rolls up into the, board of directors and whatnot, and everyone's having to pay attention now to security issues and GDPR type issues. So organizations shall designate a data protection officer and shall ensure that they are involved properly and in a timely manner in all issues which relate to the protection of personal data. So again, this is more on the procedural and policy side of things. Once you've come up with them, you need to actively manage and adhere to the policies and procedures that have come up. As you can imagine, there are financial penalties associated with this, and they can be pretty severe. This certainly wouldn't apply to every company that has access to some form of data. I look at our company and I go, we don't actually have much personal data that we maintain, and we adhere to GDPR, but there's not a lot there that's exposed. The example I gave you is an accurate one, where we know some salespeople from the EU and we know their email address and maybe their phone number type of thing, but not low-level financial information or things that could cause them a real breach. But the financial penalties for folks that are in the business of really managing and processing this sort of data, it's severe. It's could be up to 20 million euro or 4% of your annual revenue. So very severe for somebody that's if you're maliciously doing this, it's going to apply. So some of the things that you need to ask your company, or if you have a leadership team, what are the things you really need to take a look at? Firstly, evaluate what personal data do you actually have? What personal data are you storing, and what's the purpose of that? Do you have a privacy policy so that any individual that you've got access to their personal data, do they understand through your privacy policy why you have that data? What data do you have and why do you have it? What's your use for that? Do you have HADR, business continuity practices in place? Can you stand up and say, look, we're the protector of this data, and we're not going to lose that data, even with an IT failure where you've lost a server or whatever. That data that was stored there, it's not good enough to say, well, it's gone. That's not okay. You have to be able to recover that data as well. Does the company understand its responsibilities in the case of a data breach? So in terms of what is the procedure, what do we have to do in the horrible event that there is a breach, what are we going to do about it? What is the policy? What do we have to do to adhere to the 72-hour requirement, that sort of thing. And then, your downstream suppliers or vendors, can they stand up to the same regulation as well? From a privacy policy perspective, this is one of the things everyone should do, and do it immediately, because it really does solve a number of the things, which says, hey, this is the data we collect, this is why we collect it, this is what we do with it ongoing, so that anyone coming to your organization is aware of that already. So privacy policy is important. This list came from Gartner. So if you look at it, I've mentioned this already, but it's really, when you go through this evaluation process, you're going to take a look at the data, you're going to look at how you're protecting it today, and then you're going to come to software companies like AVST and say, hey, I've got your communication system, but I need to introduce, let's say, encryption into the solution. So I want to make sure that I'm encrypting all message data associated with your system. And so you may, through that evaluation, you're going to go to your software vendors, your product vendors, and say, okay, I need to improve this. Can I do that through you? Do you have an option to introduce this sort of security improvement? Encryption's a great example of that. And then you have to introduce those. But it's, as a company, it's up to us to do that. It's not up to our software vendors or our product vendors or our IT vendors to do that for us. We have to drive that as companies, because we own the problem. We're the ones responsible for it. So important security controls, just to mention a few. It is, some of it's all security policy oriented, IT policy, and then others is more technical in nature. So introducing encryption, introducing two-factor authentication. So is it an access issue? Is it protecting it once the data is there? Is it policy oriented? So who has physical access to data centers? Who has access to various data? Is it really a least privilege type approach? All of those things are important. You have to evaluate your organization, evaluate the data that you're maintaining, and come up with the best approach to protect your company, and in the end, protect the customers whose data you have access to. Okay, so just a few quick takeaways here. Firstly, understand your business. Every business is a little different. We all maintain different data. We all have different relationships with our customers, our partners, our vendors, whoever it may be that interacts with our organization. So really evaluate that and determine what you need to protect from a policy perspective, from a regulation perspective. And then deploy the appropriate security measures to do exactly that, protect the data, and then implement all the processes or processes around that as well. So with that, I did mention that AVST, Xmedius, we're in the business of doing this for our customers. Our applications are all very secure and can help our customers move through this process from a data protection perspective. So I appreciate you joining us today. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thanks again.
To learn more about AVST, please visit www.avst.com.